The first thing Nkechi Mensah did on her first morning at Hansung Tech was spill an entire cup of jollof red tomato stew down the front of the whitest shirt she had ever seen in her life, and the man wearing it looked at her the way a mathematician looks at a calculator that has returned the wrong answer. Not angry, exactly, just profoundly, personally offended by the existence of the error. His name was Park Dong-hyun, and he was, by universal agreement among everyone at Hansung Tech Seoul headquarters, the most organized human being currently alive on planet Earth. His desk had a laminated color-coded schedule. His pens were arranged by ink viscosity. He ate lunch at 12:17 every single day. Not 12:15, not 12:30, but 12:17, because he had once calculated, using a spreadsheet he built specifically for this purpose, that 12:17 was the precise midpoint between his 11 a.m. meeting block and his 2 p.m. project review, allowing exactly 43 minutes for digestion before any cognitive demand resumed. His colleagues both admired and feared him. His assistant kept a private running tally of how many consecutive days he had arrived at work before 7 a.m., which currently stood at 412. Nkechi Mensah, newly hired as Hansung Tech's first African regional marketing director, had arrived from Accra with 3 overstuffed suitcases, a laugh that could rattle windows on the floor above, and a personal philosophy best summarized as, "The plan is a suggestion, the people are the point." She had built a successful marketing career in Ghana entirely on instinct, relationships, and an almost supernatural ability to read a room and say exactly the thing that made everyone in it trust her immediately. She did not own a single laminated document. She had once missed a flight by 40 minutes because she stayed at a client's office finishing a conversation she felt was too important to cut short, then landed the company's largest African contract on that same phone call while sitting in an airport departure lounge eating a meat pie. The stew incident happened because Nkechi, on her way to what she had been told was a welcome briefing, walked through the wrong door into the wrong conference room, found it empty, backed out without looking, and collided directly with Dong-hyun, who was walking past at exactly 7:43 a.m. with a travel mug of tomato-based vegetable soup he made himself every morning because, according to the nutritional spreadsheet he maintained, it optimized his morning cognitive performance. The soup was the precise shade of orange-red that stains white fabric permanently. The shirt was dry clean only. Dong-hyun stood perfectly still for 3 full seconds, which Nkechi would later describe to her friend Shade on a video call as the most terrifying 3 seconds of my professional life. "And I once presented to a room of Ghanaian investors during a power cut. I'm so sorry," Nkechi said, already pulling a packet of tissue from her handbag with the practiced efficiency of someone who has spent years navigating Lagos traffic jams and Accra office politics. "I will absolutely pay for the dry cleaning. Please tell me where." This meeting, Dong-hyun said, looking at the stain rather than at her, was not on the shared calendar. Nkechi blinked. "I'm sorry? Your arrival, your access to this floor, the welcome briefing, none of it was added to the shared calendar. I was not informed." He finally looked up, and his expression was not angry so much as sincerely, philosophically baffled, the way a person looks when reality has deviated so far from reasonable expectation that the brain requires a moment to catch up. "Who approved your access credentials?" Nkechi stared at him. She had been in Korea for 11 hours. She had not slept on the plane. She was wearing her best corporate dress, and she was absolutely certain she had just met the most infuriating person on the continent. "HR approved my access credentials," she said, with the careful, deliberate patience of someone choosing not to say at least 4 other things. "My name is Nkechi Mensah. I'm the new regional marketing director. And you are?" "Park Dong-hyun, head of operations." He looked back at the stain. "This shirt is dry clean only. I know," Nkechi said. "I offered to pay. The dry cleaner I use requires 48 hours notice for same-day service." Nkechi opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I will note," she said finally, "that the stain happened approximately 90 seconds ago, which gives us 47 hours and 58 and a half minutes before your 48-hour window closes. We are fine." Dong-hyun looked at her for a long, evaluating moment, and then, for reasons he would not be able to explain to anyone, including himself, said, "You miscounted. 47 hours, 58 minutes, and 22 seconds. And that, in the particular ridiculous way these things happen, was the beginning." Their working relationship over the following 6 weeks was the subject of considerable entertainment for everyone else at Hansung Tech's Seoul office. They were assigned to co-lead the company's first major African market expansion campaign. Dong-hyun because he was the most operationally efficient person in the building. Nkechi because she was the only person in the building who actually understood the African markets in question, and the project quickly became a masterclass in two people who were each genuinely excellent at their jobs being absolutely unable to agree on how to do any of them. Dong-hyun built a 47-slide project framework before their first joint meeting, color-coded by phase, with a risk mitigation column for every single deliverable. Nkechi arrived at their first joint meeting 20 minutes late, sat down, flipped through the framework for approximately 90 seconds, and said, with no malice whatsoever, "This is a beautiful document. No one in Accra is going to care about a single slide of it." The framework, Dong-hyun said with the strained composure of a man whose eye was threatening to twitch, is for internal alignment, not for Accra. Internal alignment, Nkechi said pleasantly, is less useful than you think if everything we align on internally is wrong about the market. They stared at each other across the conference table, surrounded by junior team members who were pretending to look at their laptops while actually watching the collision with the fascinated attention of people witnessing a traffic incident from a safe distance. "You have not read the market research brief?" Dong-hyun said. "I wrote the market research brief," Nkechi said, "for the previous company I worked at 2 years ago. And then I watched the market change because markets do that, especially in West Africa, especially in the last 18 months. She leaned forward. "Tell me something, Dong-hyun. Have you ever been to Accra? No Lagos? No Nairobi? Johannesburg? Abidjan?" A pause. "I have read extensively about all 4 cities." Nkechi pressed her lips together in a way that was clearly fighting a smile. "I'm sure you have," she said, "in color-coded tabs." The junior team members all found something extremely interesting to look at on their laptops. Dong-hyun did not smile. He also did not respond for approximately 4 seconds, which his assistant, who had observed him long enough to understand his silences, later identified as his version of conceding a point without saying so. "What do you propose instead?" he asked. "A trip," Nkechi said. "You me 3 cities in 10 days. You can build whatever framework you want after you've actually seen the markets we're building at 4.10 days is not in the current project timeline that I know. We'll need to adjust the timeline." Another 4-second silence. "I will need to see a proposed itinerary by end of day." Nkechi pulled a handwritten list from her notebook, actual paper, actual handwriting, which made Dong-hyun's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly, and slid it across the table. "Already done," she said. He looked at it. It was disorganized, undated, and written in 3 different colors of pen, with arrows connecting points that seemed to have been added as afterthoughts. It was also, he could see even through the frustration, genuinely well-structured in its underlying logic, covering exactly the right cities in an order that minimized travel time in a way he wouldn't have expected from someone who appeared to operate primarily on instinct. He picked up a pen. "I will need to digitize this." "Obviously," Nkechi said. "And add dates. Please. And a contingency schedule. If it makes you feel better." He looked up. Something in his expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the way a very stiff door shifts when someone finally finds the right angle of pressure. "It does," he said entirely seriously. Nkechi laughed, the full, window-rattling version, and 3 junior team members looked up from their laptops at exactly the same moment. The trip was, professionally speaking, a genuine success. Nkechi's contacts in Accra, Lagos, and Nairobi opened doors Dong-hyun's research could never have anticipated. And the insights they gathered in 10 days fundamentally restructured the campaign's approach in ways that the 47-slide framework, however beautiful, had completely missed. But the professional success was almost secondary to the education each of them received in the other, delivered in the unavoidable intimacy of shared taxis, delayed flights, overbooked hotels, and a particularly memorable afternoon in Lagos where the power went out in their client's office building and Dong-hyun sat in complete darkness for 37 minutes. He timed it, responding to emails by phone torchlight while Nkechi entertained the entire client team with stories about the worst power cuts she had ever experienced, until the clients were crying with laughter and the lights came back on to find Dong-hyun looking up from his phone with an expression that was not quite a smile but was in the general neighborhood of one. It was in that Lagos office. During the 43 minutes they spent waiting for their car afterward, that Dong-hyun did something that rewrote everything Nkechi thought she understood about him. Their client, a warm, voluble woman named Mrs. Okafor who ran a mid-sized retail chain across 3 Nigerian states, had mentioned in passing during the meeting that her logistics software kept failing on the 3rd Tuesday of every month. A quirk she'd accepted as simply one of those inexplicable things. Dong-hyun had asked 3 questions, opened his laptop, and in the time it took Nkechi and Mrs. Okafor to drink a cup of tea and discuss Accra versus Lagos traffic, had identified the bug. A monthly batch update conflicting with a manual override her team ran on the same day. Written a workaround, and emailed it to Mrs. Okafor's IT manager with a clear explanation. He did this without announcing it, without asking for thanks, and without once suggesting it was anything other than an obvious thing to do while waiting for a car. Mrs. Okafor read the email, looked at Dong-hyun over her reading glasses, and said, "This man is a keeper, Nkechi. You should keep him." Nkechi, who was in the process of drinking tea, coughed at Dong-hyun, who did not appear to have registered the implication, said thank you to Mrs. Okafor and went back to his laptop. Nkechi spent the entire car ride to the hotel looking out the window, aware that her face was doing something she was not entirely in control of. Dong-hyun adapted with a speed that surprised her. He was not, she discovered, actually resistant to new information. He was resistant to disorganization, which was a different thing entirely, and once he understood that her instinctive approach was not chaos but a different system operating at a different frequency, he began treating her methods with the same careful attention he gave everything he considered worth understanding. Nkechi discovered things about Dong-hyun on that trip that the Seoul office would never have shown her. He was not, as she had initially assumed, simply a man who loved spreadsheets more than people. He was a man who had grown up in a household of organized chaos. For younger siblings, a mother who ran 3 small businesses simultaneously, a father who was brilliant and warm and constitutionally incapable of paying a bill on time, and had built his entire system of control specifically because the absence of it in his childhood had cost his family more than once in ways he refused to let repeat. His systems were not personality quirks. They were, she realized, watching him in a Lagos traffic jam calmly rerouting their schedule on his phone while their driver apologized profusely, a form of love, for the people whose time he was protecting, for the outcomes he was trying to guarantee, for a world that behaved better when it was taken care of properly. The moment she understood this, somewhere between a market visit in Lagos and a dinner in Accra where Dong-hyun ate jollof rice for the first time and went very quiet for a full minute before asking, with absolute sincerity, for the name of every spice in it, she also understood that she was in trouble. Dong-hyun, for his part, was not blind to what was happening on his end either, though he handled it the way he handled everything he could not immediately solve, by creating a private document. On his phone titled Nkechi Situation Assessment, in which he wrote 3 bullet points and then deleted all of them twice before closing the document entirely and deciding to wait for more data. Back in Seoul, before the Nairobi leg of the trip, they had one final week in the office together that their colleagues later referred to simply as the week things changed, though nobody could point to a single moment that proved it. It was visible only in accumulation. Dong-hyun began holding the elevator when he saw Nkechi crossing the lobby. A small deviation from his time schedule, he appeared entirely unaware of making. Nkechi started arriving to their joint meetings 2 minutes early, which no one who knew her professional history would have considered possible. During one late evening in the office when everyone else had gone home, she fell asleep on the small office sofa while reviewing campaign footage, and Dong-hyun, finding her there at 9:40 p.m. when he came back for his forgotten transit card, draped his jacket over her without waking her and left a note on the coffee table that read, in his precise handwriting, "Review materials saved to shared drive. Last train is 11:02. The note included a small printed map of the station entrance nearest to the office building. Nkechi photographed it and sent it to her friend Shade with no caption. Shade replied with 17 consecutive exclamation marks. The data arrived on the last night of the trip, in Nairobi, during a dinner that had not been on anyone's itinerary. Their final meeting had ended 2 hours earlier than scheduled, a first on the entire trip, and an event Dong-hyun had marked in his calendar with a small star, and Nkechi, restless and energized the way she always was after a good client meeting, suggested food at a place her contact had recommended that was not a restaurant but a sort of outdoor communal eating situation involving plastic chairs, a man with a very large grill, and nyama choma so good it required no conversation for approximately 15 minutes. They sat across from each other in plastic chairs under string lights while a Nairobi evening cooled around them, eating in the kind of comfortable silence that is only available to 2 people who have spent 10 days in close quarters and run out of things to argue about. Then Dong-hyun said, with no preamble, "I have been thinking about the campaign closing strategy." Nkechi looked at him. "We are eating nyama choma under string lights in Nairobi," she said, "at 9:45 p.m. on our last night here, and you are thinking about the closing strategy." "Yes. Dong-hyun. The Q3 deadline." Dong-hyun. He stopped, looked at his food. Something crossed his face that she had not seen before. Not embarrassment exactly, but a kind of self-aware exasperation. A man catching himself doing the thing he always does in the moment he is most trying not to. I do not know how to do this, he said, quietly enough that she had to lean slightly forward to hear it. Whatever this is. Nkechi set down her fork. Outside the string lights, Nairobi hummed and moved and smelled of grilled meat and evening rain coming. This, she said carefully, is two colleagues having dinner. Is it? Dong-hyun said. It was not quite a question. A long pause. Nkechi looked at him with the frank, assessing attention she usually reserved for client rooms, reading the exact specific weight of the moment. No, she admitted. Probably not. Another silence, but a different kind this time, not the 4-second operational pause of a man processing information, but the kind of silence that happens when two people are standing on opposite sides of a door and both just heard the handle turned. I would like to add this to the calendar, Dong-hyun said finally, with such perfect, deadpan seriousness that Nkechi stared at him for a full 3 seconds before she started laughing. Add what to the calendar? She said. What are you adding? Whatever this is. He picked up his fork. It should be scheduled properly. You cannot schedule feelings, Dong-hyun. I disagree, he said. I believe most relationship failures occur due to insufficient planning. That is the most. I cannot. She was laughing too hard to finish the sentence. You are going to schedule a feeling. I am going to schedule time, he corrected with dignity, to explore whether the feeling is worth the scheduling. He paused. This is different. Nkechi wiped her eyes. The string lights swayed slightly in the Nairobi wind. Across the grill, the cook glanced over at the woman laughing and the man sitting very straight in a plastic chair with an expression of total seriousness and smiled to himself in the way of someone who has seen enough of life to recognize when a story is turning. What went wrong arrived via email at 6:43 the following morning, while they were both still at the Nairobi airport waiting for their return flight to Seoul. It was from Hansung Tech's CEO, addressed to Dong-hyun with Nkechi copied in, informing them that the board had made a preliminary decision about the African expansion campaign, and that the decision was not to expand at all, but rather to consolidate the African regional marketing rollback under the existing Asia-Pacific division, eliminating Nkechi's position entirely in the process, effective at the end of the current quarter. The timing was, to put it carefully, not ideal. Dong-hyun read the email 3 times. Nkechi read it once. They sat in the same airport departure lounge, at the same row of seats, not speaking, with one empty seat between them that felt suddenly very wide. The flight home was 7 hours. For the first 2, neither of them said a word about the email. Dong-hyun opened his laptop. Nkechi looked out the window at clouds she couldn't name. The 3rd hour, somewhere over the Indian Ocean, Dong-hyun closed his laptop, turned to her and said, I did not know about this decision, I know. Nkechi said, I want to be clear that Dong-hyun, I know. She turned from the window to look at him, and her face was not angry, which he had been prepared for, but something more complicated that he had less framework to navigate. I'm not angry at you. I'm just working out what comes next. What came next, as it happened, was Dong-hyun and Nkechi working the problem from the other end entirely. While he spent the following week building a business case for the African expansion, color-coded and financially airtight, she got back on the phone with Mrs. Okafor and 4 other contacts across Lagos, Accra, and Nairobi, and came back 3 days later with signed letters of intent that no spreadsheet could have generated. Real retailers, real numbers, real willingness to commit money to a partnership that did not yet officially exist. Dong-hyun's document proved the expansion made sense on paper. Nkechi's proved it was already happening. He did not tell her he was building his half. She did not tell him she was building hers. They found out at the same meeting, laying 2 entirely different kinds of evidence on the same table, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, the operational case and the human one, arriving from opposite directions and meeting in the middle, which was, if either of them had thought to say it out loud, more or less the story of the 2 of them so far. Nkechi, watching Dong-hyun present to the board, noticed that his voice carried a heat it didn't usually have, and that the 4-second pause he used operationally was entirely absent. The board reversed the decision. Nkechi's position was reinstated. The expansion went forward. In the corridor outside the boardroom. Afterward, Nkechi found Dong-hyun checking something on his phone with the mild, slightly distracted air of a man who had simply completed a task and moved on to the next one. You didn't tell me you were doing that, she said. It was not yet confirmed, he said, still looking at his phone. You also did not tell me about the letters of intent. They also were not yet confirmed. He looked up. We make a good team, she said. He held her gaze for approximately 3 seconds, which his assistant, watching through a glass partition from a respectful distance, clocked and later reported to 2 colleagues as the longest he has looked at another human being without checking his watch that I have personally ever witnessed. That I added something to the calendar. Dong-hyun said. Nkechi raised an eyebrow. Did you? Saturday. 7 p.m. dinner. The details are in the shared calendar. He paused. I have sent you edit access. You have sent me edit access to your personal calendar. Shared calendar, he corrected. I created a new one. It is color-coded green. Nkechi stared at him. A smile was spreading across her face that she was making absolutely no effort to contain. Green for what? Dong-hyun put his phone back in his pocket, straightened his jacket. A new white shirt, dry-cleaned, impeccable, and said with the composed, unshakable seriousness of a man who had thought this through and was entirely at peace with the conclusion. Green for important. Nkechi laughed, the full one, the window-rattling one, the one that made 2 passing junior analysts look up from their phones and grin at each other for no reason they could have named. She laughed until Dong-hyun, standing in the corridor in his perfect shirt with his perfect posture, felt something in his own chest that he could not have put in a spreadsheet, could not have color-coded, could not have scheduled or risk-mitigated or represented in any of the 47 slides he had built to make sense of a world that, on the afternoon he had walked into a hallway carrying a travel mug of tomato soup, had become considerably more complicated and considerably better than any version of it he had planned for.